The wind rustled low through the brittle chaparral as Jack Hart rode along a ridge line that watched over the alkali flats like a tired sentry. The sun bled orange across the sky, casting long shadows that reached ahead of his horse like omens. Dutch Wallace nickered softly and dipped his head, sensing the unease Jack had carried since crossing the old Appalach draw 2 nights prior. The land felt off. Too still. Too quiet. Dust drifted in long veils behind him, a ghost trail leading from nowhere to a town whose name was starting to sound like a warning. Larkspur Bend. Once a miner's haven, now little more than wind-spoken stories on cracked lips at saloons 2 counties east. Folks said things didn't move right there. Said a man who smiled at dusk might not see morning. Jack shifted in the saddle, adjusting the way his rifle rested behind him. His bounty posters were folded neat inside his jacket, a face he hardly remembered, wanted for a train robbery along the Gila line. But that was routine work, and something was already telling Jack this trip wouldn't stay routine for long. When he crested the last hill, the town of Larkspur revealed itself like something half-remembered in a fever. The outlines of once busy streets lay under layers of dust and silence. One shutter banged softly in the dry wind. No children. No laughter. Even the dogs had abandoned their barks. The church bell hung still, its rope frayed and cut short. He tied Dutch outside the old general store. Inside, an old man watched him from behind the barrel rack. His hands didn't move, didn't even twitch, as Jack stepped through the door. "Jack Hart," the man said, not quite surprised. "Thought I saw the ridge give warning. Didn't think I'd find hell plated over in silence," Jack replied, eyes roving shelves mostly empty now. The man said nothing, just turned his gaze toward the west window, where the failing sun threw blood across the horizon. "They took the sheriff," he muttered finally, "and anyone who spoke his name loud after." Jack nodded once. "How many?" "Enough to make that bell stay quiet." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling down the alleyways like breath through teeth. Jack tipped his hat lower, turned toward the saloon across the square where the name Mercy's swayed on rusted hinges. He didn't know what waited beyond that door, but he sensed it had teeth, and it had already bitten, rode the wind like ghosts searching for form. The sun dipped low behind jagged ridgelines, bleeding amber into the cracks of the earth. Jack Hart stood over the body, hat in hand, silence pulling tight around his shoulders. Ethan Reynolds hadn't lasted long, not with 2 rounds in the gut and half his blood painted across the dirt. His hands had trembled when Jack found him crawling from the pine-thick trail that led down from Greeley's Highland cabin. Trembled, but not hesitated. "They still got her." He'd gasped. "My sister, Mabel, 8 days. Chained, like a dog behind the cabin. Don't leave her." Those final words, scarce more than breath clinging to hope, struck deeper than lead. As Ethan's gaze went still beneath sky-worn lashes, Jack felt the stirrings of a guilt he'd buried beneath 10 years of whiskey, miles, and want-nothings. There were rules to the bounty game. Rules he'd lived by. Get the name. Get the gold. Don't look back. But standing there, listening to pine needles shift and coyotes begin their hymns, Jack broke his own best rule. He whispered low, like a vow meant only for the dead. "I didn't come here for a cuss." Jack turned without another word, loosening the cantle straps on Dutch's saddle. The old horse flicked an ear, knowing better than to ask why. Jack swung up and tugged the reins, pulling toward the ridgeline trail Ethan had stumbled down. No moon yet, only the fading gold glow that painted everything in long shadows and tawny flame. As horse and rider climbed, Jack's thoughts bent backward, to another war, another woman. He hadn't said her name in years, no right to. But he remembered her face when he obeyed orders instead of instinct, when he'd walked away, telling himself he couldn't save them all. That lie had bought him sleep for a time. Sleep in silence. Now, with the dusk getting meaner, he'd found no peace in either. They called this trail widow's wound for how it cut across brittle stone like a scar across skin. Jack followed it without pause. He didn't know Mabel Reynolds, didn't know her anything. But the dead didn't whisper lies, and Ethan had spent his final breaths begging for a promise, not vengeance, not mercy, just rescue. So Jack rode toward a chained woman, not to rewrite the past, but maybe to forgive his part in it. With every hoofbeat, the silence behind him grew heavier, and the purpose ahead clearer than ever. The woods behind the old Greeley cabin were quiet, too quiet. Jack's boots sank into loamy pine needles as he crouched behind a moss-dark boulder, eyes fixed on the crooked back porch. Sunlight filtered through tall firs, slicing the ground into gold and shadow. Every inch of the place reeked of secrets, the kind that didn't stay buried. Jack waited, watching. 2 guards circled slow in the clearing like wolves bored of meat. One scratched his beard, laughing at something unheard. Neither looked inside the lean to behind the cabin, too used to the silence behind it, too sure of their boss's grip. When the moment was right, Jack moved. He crossed 20 yards of open space, like smoke through trees, silent, steady, revolver low. He took the first man with a quick strike to the temple, then rolled behind the porch as the second turned, shouting. A misstep, a flash of iron, and Jack fired once. The echo rang out like judgment. Then, silence again. Jack crept toward the lean-to. It wasn't much, just a tacked-on shack with rotting timbers, wrapped in rusted chicken wire. The closer he came, the more the stench turned his gut. Sweat, rust, something older. Then he saw her. She was chained to a beam sunk into packed earth, thin iron manacles around both wrists. Her dress, once violet, was a map of tears and dirt, but her eyes, green, sharp, defiant, met his without flinch or plea. "You Mabel Reynolds?" Jack asked, voice low, coarse. "Who's asking?" she rasped. "Your brother sent me." Jack knelt, pulling bolt cutters from his saddlebag. He said, "You're not a dog." Her lips twitched once. "Ethan, that fool," she muttered, then looked away. "Is he?" "Gone," Jack said softly, placing the cutters to the chain. "But he died coming for you." For a moment, something trembled across her face. Grief or fire, he couldn't say. The metal snapped with a jerk of his arms, falling against the beam. Mabel breathed slow. Then she curled the fingers of her freed hands, as if remembering how they worked. "You're free now," Jack whispered. She stood on unsteady feet, but didn't sway. "Not yet," she said, voice steadying. "This place took more than just my time." Jack met her gaze. "Then we take it back." No hero's music followed, just the creak of saddle leather and the wind through the tall trees, as 2 shadows left that clearing, one trudging back to life, the other to reckon with. Didn't flinch when he knelt to break the chain. The rust-flecked iron cuff had bit deep into her ankle, and flies hummed lazily around the wounds. But Mabel Reynolds only stared at him, through him, with dry, defiant eyes. Jack could see the strength coiled there, like a mountain cat waiting for the moment to strike. He took out his knife. The padlock was old, beat up from years of rain and neglect. The blade slid into the hasp, twisted hard. A click, then the sound of iron falling to dirt. Freeing her wasn't a triumph. It felt overdue, like righting a wrong no one else had the sense to notice. She drew back slowly, not trusting the space around her. Her first steps were stiff, as though her legs were waking up from some long sleep. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. "What's your name?" Jack asked softly. She studied him like she was weighing whether the truth could be trusted. Then, "Mabel." Her voice was hoarse, sun-scorched, but steady. "Mabel Reynolds." Jack nodded. "Your brother's the one who sent me." She paused, then tilted her head to the horizon. "Is he dead?" He waited as long as he could, held on just to speak your name. Mabel nodded once. No tears, no wailing, just a solemn blink against the harsh desert sun. A woman who'd seen too much sorrow already to waste it on ceremony. "I can't ride proper," she said. "Legs no good yet." Jack helped her to Dutch, wrapping a wet cloth around her wrist. She didn't recoil when he lifted her, though pain flushed her face. As they rode through the scrub brush, silence returned, heavy like dust in the wind. Later, at a dry ravine surrounded by brittle mesquite, Mabel finally broke it. I heard other girls. Jack looked over. They kept us quiet, but I remember voices, crying in languages I didn't know. Her eyes drifted. No one ever came for them. Jack didn't speak, just tossed a branch into the fire. I'm not grateful, she added after a while. You don't have to be. I don't want peace. I want the kind of justice this land pretends doesn't exist. Jack met her eyes. Something passed between them, recognition maybe. Two kinds of pain twisted into the same knot. I'm not asking you to rest, he said. I'm asking if you'd ride beside me. She smiled, small and fierce. I never learned how to quit. Dust had settled low beneath the stars, curling in the windless dark as Jack Hart and Mabel crouched in the crook of the dry ravine. A ring of stones cradled a flickering fire between them, its warmth barely cutting the cold that dropped like a curtain after sunset. Dutch snorted quietly a few yards off, and the silence beyond felt like it had teeth. Mabel cradled the canteen close, though she hadn't drunk much. Her wrists, still raw from the chains, rested on her knees. Firelight danced across her face, catching in the miles of shadow behind her eyes. They took more than my brother, she said, her voice low, steady. Back up in those hills. I heard others screaming. Nights when they thought no one could hear. Greeley's men think copper makes them kings. Jack said nothing. He'd heard that kind of scream before. In a different country, under different flags. But pain didn't change its sound. I don't want rescue, she went on, watching embers rise. I want him to bleed. I want every cursed inch of that place turned inside out. Jack stared at the fire. The heat licked his skin, but the cold inside him wouldn't melt. You sound like someone I once knew, he said at last. She looked at him, questioning. He shifted uncomfortably, then pulled a silver locket from inside his coat, held it gently, thumb brushing its edge. War took me to Georgia. There was a woman there, Leah. Ran a safe house on the edge of a cotton river. Hid folks running north. She asked for help when the hounds came, and I followed orders instead. Walked off, said it wasn't our fight. His voice cracked. They burned her alive the next evening, silence stretched, drawn tight like a drumhead. I was good at taking trails, tracking men. Less so at standing for something. Mabel's eyes didn't blink or soften. Instead, she reached forward and placed her hand on top of his. Then let's stand for something now, she said. Jack met her gaze, weary but clear-eyed. We end it. All of it. The fire snapped, casting shadows up the wall of the ravine. A new kind of warmth settled between them. Not comfort, but resolve. Behind them, the flats slept. Ahead, the spine waited, Greeley's fortress, grinning in the dusk. Tonight, old guilt met a new fire. And something wicked would soon catch flame. Dust moved like ghosts across the alkali flats, riding hard, and low over the cracked, white crust. Jack Hart sat quiet in the saddle, letting Dutch Wallace pick his own way through the ripple of dry land and heat shimmer. The horizon offered nothing but burned sky and stone teeth. It had been half a day since they'd buried Ethan Reynolds in the pine bramble, and Jack hadn't spoken since. In the silence, memories kicked up like tumbleweeds. Georgia, 1864, a burned-out chapel, shouts in the smoke, a woman crying, then silence, always silence. Jack's hand flexed on the reins. Alkali dust coated his coat, caked at the edges of his boots. A man's past sure loves to track him, he muttered. Mabel rode beside him now. She didn't ask questions, didn't speak much either, but her gaze combed the land like a hawk's. She wore Ethan's bandana tied around her wrist, a red slash of grief and vow stitched in sweat. The chains had been cut. Her skin bore the marks, but her spine stood straighter every mile they rode away from that cabin. They stopped near a twisted mesquite at the edge of an old dry wash. Jack crouched beside a flattened patch of earth, faint boot tracks recent. "They moved through here last night," he said. "4 riders. Heavy prints. Guard patrol, most likely." Mabel nodded. "They'll be headed back to the spine by dusk." Jack looked up, eyeing the ridgeline. "You sure that canyon's where Greeley keeps the others?" She stepped closer, voice low. "Ethan told me stories. Before they took our claim, we used to map the region together. Cartographers don't get bullets, landowners do." She pointed southeast. "There's a hollow in the rocks near Split Tooth Bluff. Old church posts and a bell that don't ring anymore. That's where the cages are." Jack stood. "You could leave now. Keep riding west and let this die behind you." She stared into the wind. "You ever tried outrunning echoes?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Tried. Failed." They mounted up again and turned east toward the cliffs. The wind scattered the dust around them like a whisper too faint to name. Behind them, the flats stretched wide and empty, but ahead, justice crouched in the shadows of stone, waiting for its reckoning. Between silences, the land seemed to listen, and what it heard was a pair of broken souls riding not to escape, but to set something right. They gathered where the land opened like a scar, an old quarry pit outside Bitter Ridge, where nothing grew but rusted iron shards and scorched mesquite. The fire Jack lit that night was small, but it burned long, its glow catching the eyes of those who had once lost all hope. Word had spread quiet but fast. Greeley's grip was slipping. Something had cracked the chain, and where cracks shone light, people stepped forward. Bishop Madden was the first. He rode in with hammer slung, and a look in his eyes Jack hadn't seen since Gettysburg, steadiness, like stone beneath floodwater. He didn't ask what needed doing. He just sat down beside the fire and said, "Still got your aim?" Jack nodded. "Still got your swing?" That was enough. Next came Mercy Potts, bringing 2 women with hollow eyes and stronger hands. They carried their own scars beneath shawls in silence. Mabel stepped forward and clasped one of their hands. No words passed, but something deeper did. A vow, maybe, or shared memory. Miners with soot-stained faces slipped in after that. Old men. Young ones. One walked with a wooden crutch, but his jaw was set like granite. Greeley had stolen father's, son's land. Tonight, the reckoning gathered in shadows and whispers. Jack stood slowly, the fire painting half his face in gold and smoke. "We don't go in as lawmen," he said, voice gravel soft. "We go in as memory, as ghosts they thought they'd buried." He paused, eyes sweeping the circle. "This isn't for vengeance alone. It's for everyone who couldn't get free or couldn't make it to the fence." A silence lingered, broken only by the crackle of fire. Then Mabel rose. She looked less like someone who had been chained and more like someone who had snapped her own shackles. "We're not the broken," she said evenly. "We're the ones they failed to break." That ignited something. Heads lifted. Shoulders straightened. Plans began forming through grime-covered sketches in sand. Mercy marked the outer posts of Greeley's stockade from memory. Bishop outlined the forged traps he'd built. The oil would come from a rusted freight tank found near the ridge. The women? They knew the chapel's rhythm better than any map ever could. They weren't strategists. They were survivors. And that night under desert stars, they became a single cause whispered on the wind, not seeking justice from a court that never knew their names, but returning it, bullet for bullet, as only the forgotten could. Night swallowed the alkali flats in a hush, broken only by the crunch of boots over dry gravel and the whispered clink of tin lanterns. The wind, dry as bone, slid through the canyon like a breath held too long. Jack Hart crouched behind a clump of sagebrush along the ridge above the estate, his silhouette a shadow among shadows. Beside him, Bishop Madden cradled an iron-forged scattergun, his face carved with quiet purpose. Below, the spine-shaped canyon cradled Cyrus Greeley's fortress like a secret, all sharp angles and deceitful stillness. They called the place the Spine, a fake church at the mouth, stockade to the rear, and in between, a dozen stone buildings huddled like guilty secrets. Guards wandered the paths with lazy discipline, lanterns swinging, rifles hung across shoulders, scraped bare from sun and sin. From the right flank, a hiss. Mabel had made it through. She wore the guise of mourning, black veil pulled low, hands trembling just enough to pass as grief. The guards barely looked at her as she crossed the chapel threshold. Mercy had written the forged letter well. Sorrow struck the heart of even monsters if bound in family names and inheritance claims. On CU, Jack signaled. A slow hoot from Dutch Wallace echoed faintly down the ridge. That was the mark. The oil jugs were in place. The first explosion came with a bloom of fire that lit the canyon in wicked orange. The second tore through the left wall of the stockade, and screaming followed, men tangled in smoke, gunpowder, and sudden fear. Jack moved like smoke over gravel, slipping through the rear gate, while Bishop thundered from the western slope with riflemen, ex-slaves, miners, a mother who'd once buried a daughter. No one here fought for gold. They fought for memory. Inside the chapel, Mabel walked the aisle like a ghost reborn. Greeley turned from the altar, arrogant and alone, a Bible in hand. "Didn't expect repentance from your kind," he muttered. "No," Mabel said, "only reckoning." What followed wasn't fury. It was calm. A slow trigger pull. A shot to the chest, not to kill, but to hollow. Greeley dropped to his knees, coughing disbelief. Jack appeared at the door, gun lowered, eyes locked on the moment that didn't need him. As fire crept toward the rafters, Mabel knelt close to Greeley's ear and whispered, "Tell it to hell." Then she stood and walked out into the night. Gunfire echoed against the stone walls of the canyon, sharp and ragged like thunder tearing through bone. Smoke rolled low across the dirt paths of Greeley's estate, carrying with it the scent of oil and blood. Jack moved through it like a shadow with a heartbeat, his revolver warm in his hand, boots crunching over the shattered remnants of a man's empire. In the chapel, now cracked and burning like an accusation, Mabel had already slipped through sanctified doors. The black widow garb clung to her like mourning itself had taken form, concealing the sharpened steel beneath. The stained glass saints watched her pass, silent, cracked-eyed onlookers to justice past due. Atop the hayloft in Greeley's barn, Jack finally cornered the land baron. The man bled from a gash along his ribs, but his confidence didn't waver. His words still carried the poison of years unchecked. "You'll hang for this, Hart. Mark it, kill one of us, and 10 more take his place. World don't change for one woman." Jack hesitated. His revolver was steady, but his spirit warred. That's when she stepped from the shadows behind them, reloading with chilling calm. Her voice didn't rise. It cut. "You're right. One woman doesn't change the world. But one bullet? One truth? Might be a start." Greeley spun, startled. She didn't flinch, didn't shout, just aimed low, sure, permanent. The gunshot wasn't loud. It was final. Greeley collapsed, a cry scraping free as feeling left his legs. He would live long enough to reckon with what he'd become. Jack stepped back. He had seen vengeance before, but this was something else. Not rage, not cruelty, just resolve. Mabel knelt beside the man, whispering something only his guilt would carry forever. Then she turned, backlit by the fire crackling higher tea through the rafters. Outside, Bishop's voice rallied survivors. Metal clanged, prisoners burst through gates, and the air began to clear. Jack and Mabel emerged into dawn painted red, smoke curling skyward like confessions. He nodded, asking nothing. She answered in kind, already walking toward Dutch Wallace's reins. Behind them, the barn began to collapse. The world didn't change with thunder. It changed with the sound of a gun, and a woman unchained. Dust spun behind their horses like fading ghosts as the sun dipped low, bleeding gold into the ridgelines. Bitter Ridge was quiet again, but not like before, not in fear. This silence came soft, the kind that follows a storm finally spent. Jack Hart rode ahead, shadow long and hunched in the dying light. Mabel leaned forward in her saddle, fingers resting easy on the reins, gaze locked on the open distance. The road unwound before them with promise instead of warning. They'd buried the dead, those who could be buried, and helped the freed find beds, names, and breath again. Bishop Madden hung his new star outside the sheriff's office. Mercy Potts poured whiskey without fear of who would walk through the door next. Folks swept their porches now, not because of dust, but because they dared to care again. No one asked where Jack and Mabel were headed. No one needed to. "I reckon you've got places to see," Jack said at last, voice edged with gravel and regret. "I've got names to remember," Mabel replied, "and others still wearing shackles invisible to men like Greeley. Someone ought to find them." Jack nodded, slowly. "That someone's you, then?" Mabel looked at him, soft smile hidden in the brim of her hat. "Revenge was easy. Living, that's harder. But I'm ready for the hard things now." The road forked ahead, two paths veering like old choices. Jack pulled Dutch Wallace to a stop. "Never meant to be part of this one," he murmured. "You were," Mabel said. "You still are." He looked to the west, shadows creeping long over the flats, horizon burning orange like a trail never quite caught. "You going after more chains?" he asked. She answered, "I'm going to break them or bend 'em leastways." Jack's fingers brushed the old bounty ledger in his satchel, pages torn and blood smudged. Slowly, he drew it out and let it slip to the sand like an old sin being confessed. "I've chased men," he said. "Shot 'em down, dragged 'em in for gold. I'm done chasing things that end in graves." Mabel gestured to the line of sky ahead. "Then chase this." He tapped his hat. She touched hers. 2 horses, 2 hearts, and an open land ahead. No chains now, just sky, and the promise that if the road could wound, it could also heal. They rode on,